me to dim them?
No, they're going to be dimmed just now.
Okay.
My name is John Newton, and I wrote Amazing Grace, a song that's become somewhat of a tradition. 243 years ago. It warms my heart to see young people all over the world today singing this song. We all have a need to be loved. Yet rarely do we receive unconditional love when we do wrong. The purpose of my talk today is to inspire you to seek this unconditional love. For if a wretch like me can receive it, you can also. I call this unique love amazing grace, because I did not deserve it or earn it. But to truly appreciate this grace, you have to hear about my ugly past. When I was 6 years old, my mother passed away. I became quite unruly. When I was 10, I could out-drink, I could out-curse, and I could out-fight most of the men in my city. That impressed my dad, who was a sailor for the British Navy. And he took me to the seas with him at age 11. When I was 18, I was tired of the assault from my dad, from his words and from his fists. So I jumped ship to find a job on land. But shortly after that, the Navy caught up with me, captured me, and placed me on the HMS Harwich. I was demoted to the lowest rank. I was beaten and I was flogged with 96 lashes in front of 350 crew. You would think that would have adjusted my attitude. But I responded by cursing that officer and spitting in his face. You could say that put a damper on our relationship. There was another ship coming our way called the Pegasus. It was a slave trading ship. And at my request, I was transferred to this ship. Yet the crew of this ship soon resented me as well. When this ship arrived at its destination in Africa, I was abandoned. And I was captured by a slave trader and made a slave. For 18 months, I worked 16-hour days. And I barely had enough food to survive. If it wasn't for the other slaves who brought me food, I surely would have died. At the request of my dad, a British captain of a slave trading ship came looking for me, and I was found. For the next 7 years, I worked on slave trading ships. We would sail from Britain to Africa, taking with us weapons, weapons, food, clothing, and alcohol. And we would negotiate with a tribe leader. In exchange for those goods, we'd receive up to 600 slaves. And we'd place each slave in the bottom deck of the boat, lying down, chained in place, and stacked 2 rows high like bags of grain. And while we were sailing, I would hear voices, I would hear cries, I would hear suffering below. And it had no impact on me, because I was once a slave too. And while we were sailing, we'd sail from Africa to the United States as quickly as we could. And if anyone got super ill or died, I would just throw them overboard. That's how cold-hearted I was. When we arrived in the United States, we would exchange those slaves for corn, cotton, sugar, and alcohol. And then we'd sail back to Britain, where we'd exchange those for cash. In March 1748, while we were traveling from Britain, on our way back to Britain, I came across a book about Jesus Christ. I'd never read about him before. It's called The Imitation of Christ by Thomas Kempis. My eyes were opened. That night while I was sleeping, I was awakened by violent rocking of our ship. And when I got out of bed, I was in knee-deep of water. Not a good sign. So I ran to the stairs to get up to the main deck. But there was a man in front of me blocking it. He didn't want to go up. And I heard the captain shout, "Give me a knife!" And when the man went up on deck to get a knife, I saw with my own eyes a large wave come and wash him into the sea. I knew that day I'm this close to death. And I thought I was going to die. So, thinking I'm going to see God soon, I got down on my knees in the water. And I cried, "If this will not do, the Lord have mercy upon us." It was the hour I first believed. The captain was steering the ship. He was very exhausted. So he asked me to take it over. And when I took over the helm of the ship, I just had a sense of peace and God's favor among us. For example, we had a hole in the ship that was taking in large amounts of water. And God, miraculously, moved the cargo to plug the hole and keep it plugged through all that violent rocking, which lasted 24 hours. You see, we were in a hurricane. I will never forget that day. It was March the 10th, 1748. It was the day I first believed and the day I was saved. Out of gratitude to God, I quit cursing and drinking from that day forward. But I didn't trust him enough to turn from my evil job. That took a stroke 6 years later and a 1-year recovery. And during that recovery, I studied God's amazing grace every single day. And during that time, I came to trust Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. Also during that time, I became a different man. For the next 43 years of my life, I served the poor and I preached God's amazing grace. I also took a stand against slavery, which was a very unpopular thing to do in my day. I mentored a young Christian lawyer named William Wilberforce. He was a member of Parliament. He was the only one who took a stand against slavery, and he was ridiculed for it. But over 20 years, with lots of hard work, of course answered prayer, the Slave Trade Act of 1807 was passed, 6 months before I died, abolishing the slave trade within the British Empire. You see, God used an infidel, a libertine, an evil slave trader like me for good. Consider my opening remark. Everyone has a need to be loved. But we don't always receive unconditional love when we do wrong. As you've seen by my story, God extended unconditional love to me, amazing grace to a wretch like me who didn't deserve it. Not only did it transform my life, but it transformed the world around me. Because I took an active part in abolishing the slave trade in my world, the British Empire. Please consider my Christmas gift for you, which is in these bags in front of you. It communicates the love story of God's amazing grace. May you be inspired to receive it, to receive that grace. And may you and the world around you be transformed by it. That's amazing grace.